unmasking the power struggle, the battle for land and justice. In every corner of the world, there are battles that go unnoticed by the majority. These battles are often not fought with weapons but with words, laws, and a seemingly small piece of land. Picture this. You've spent decades working hard, saving money, and finally, you've achieved the dream of owning a farm. It's your slice of peace, your little sanctuary away from the chaos of the modern world. But then, one day, the rules change. Not because of something you've done wrong, but because of something someone else wants to take from you. Welcome to the world of property rights, neighborhood associations, and the relentless power struggles that can make or break individuals. This is the story of an ordinary man caught in the crossfire of what seemed to be a battle of wills between a community association and his right to live the life he envisioned. What started as a peaceful dream of growing organic vegetables soon turned into a nightmare, as his new neighbors, led by the fierce and unrelenting Eleanor Whitfield, decided his farm was a nuisance. How does one protect their rights when an entire community organization seems to be against them? How does a person with no political power or wealth stand up to a board of directors who believe they can control everything, from how the grass is cut to what plants can be grown? And when does the situation escalate from a simple disagreement to something that feels like a full-fledged war? This story, as you'll soon see, is not just about a man trying to save his land. It's about a David versus Goliath struggle, one where the David is armed only with legal papers, persistence, and the fierce will to not back down, no matter how many obstacles are put in his way. But what happens when this battle spills into the public sphere? When the line between right and wrong becomes blurred by power, pride, and greed? Can the little guy really win? As you read on, you'll learn about the relentless pursuit of justice, the hidden agendas that can manipulate entire communities, and the surprising twists that even the most unexpected heroes can throw into the mix. In this battle, it's not just about property rights. It's about standing up to bullies, breaking through the walls of intimidation, and reclaiming what is rightfully yours, even if the odds are stacked against you. Let's take a step into the world of Maple Creek Estates, where not everything is as peaceful as it seems. The fight over a dream, the desire for a simpler life. For many, the idea of retiring on a piece of farmland, growing vegetables, and selling them at local markets represents the ultimate dream. It's a picture of simplicity, living off the land, feeling connected to nature, and escaping the hustle and bustle of city life. For this man, let's call him Mr. Davis, it was his dream come true. After decades of working as a teacher, he finally had enough saved to purchase 5 acres of prime agricultural land on the outskirts of Maple Creek Estates. Little did Mr. Davis know that his peaceful retreat would soon become a battleground, as his new neighbors, led by Eleanor Whitfield, president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, had a very different vision of what that land should be used for. The rules of the community didn't necessarily account for a functioning farm, and it didn't take long for Davis to feel the first signs of conflict when Eleanor approached him, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. From the moment they met, Eleanor looked down on Mr. Davis's farm, calling it an eyesore, and accusing him of violating community guidelines. How could something so simple, growing vegetables, raising crops, creating a sustainable living, be viewed as a violation of any sort? Yet, as it turns out, Eleanor wasn't just speaking for herself. She was the president of the HOA, which meant she had influence over the decisions made in the community, even if those decisions were unfair or not grounded in the law. Mr. Davis was initially calm, knowing full well that his land had been zoned agricultural for years, even before the HOA came into the picture. But as Eleanor dug in her heels, demanding that he cease all agricultural activities, the situation started to escalate. The once peaceful man now found himself fighting for his dream, his property, and his right to grow what he wanted on his land. It's a situation that many people might recognize. After all, in a world full of rules, regulations, and endless bureaucracies, who hasn't felt the sting of being told no when you're simply trying to live the life you've worked so hard for? The power of the HOA, a hidden force. At first glance, the HOA might seem like just another community organization, a group of people trying to ensure their neighborhood stays tidy and appealing. But as Mr. Davis soon found out, The HOA can sometimes become a power-hungry organization filled with individuals who are not content with merely overseeing the aesthetics of the neighborhood. They often become gatekeepers, deciding who is allowed to thrive and who is not. Eleanor's relentless pursuit to push Mr. Davis off his land wasn't based on any legal right. After all, his land was zoned agricultural. But as often happens when people in power don't get what they want, they use intimidation, threats, and legal tricks to force their will on others. Mr. Davis received an official notice from the HOA demanding he cease all farming activities or face heavy fines. The letters kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last. They accused him of breaking community guidelines and even went so far as to call his farm a public nuisance. As the fines mounted and the threats became more brazen, Mr. Davis did something unexpected. Rather than backing down, he started fighting back. Armed with documentation proving his land was exempt from HOA jurisdiction, he wrote firm letters, delivered them personally, and fought the harassment with the one thing that could stand up to the HOA's overreach: the truth. But it wasn't just paperwork and legal battles that would help Mr. Davis. No, he soon realized that this fight was much larger than him. It was about standing up against those who misuse their power to intimidate and bully others. As he gathered evidence, recorded trespassing incidents, and documented the destruction of his crops, the fight intensified. And it wasn't just him against the HOA anymore. As the community slowly became aware of the HOA's actions, many began to rally around Mr. Davis, standing by him as he fought for his property rights. This part of the story is a pivotal moment, one where the power of community, perseverance, and standing up for what is right begins to shine through. It wasn't just about a farmer protecting his land. It was about an entire community waking up to the fact that one person's fight could change the dynamic of an entire neighborhood. Looking ahead, the battle rages on. But the battle wasn't over. What started as a simple disagreement between neighbors soon spiraled into something far larger, with personal vendettas, trespassing, theft, and even the destruction of crops. The tactics employed by the HOA seemed limitless, and as they pushed Mr. Davis further and further into a corner, he had no choice but to take even more drastic measures. What would happen next? Would the law be on Mr. Davis's side? Or would the HOA's wealth and influence overwhelm his efforts? And what would happen when the rest of the neighborhood began to realize what was happening right under their noses? The coming sections will delve into how Mr. Davis, with the help of his lawyer, the community, and the media, began to turn the tide against the corrupt HOA. It's a story of perseverance, strategy, and never backing down, no matter how big the opposition may seem. The struggle intensifies, legal battles, media attention, and the power of community. Facing the power of the HOA, the war escalates. The saga of Mr. Davis had already taken an unexpected turn. What seemed like a simple dispute between a farmer and a homeowners association had transformed into a full-fledged battle for survival. The HOA, led by the formidable Eleanor Whitfield, was relentless. It wasn't just about the weeds, the crops, or the aesthetic guidelines anymore. It was about power, control, and the lengths people would go to when they thought they could get away with anything. And for Mr. Davis, every passing day brought more intimidation, more legal threats, and more sleepless nights. But one thing he had learned through years of teaching was this: the truth, no matter how hard it seemed to prove, always had a way of coming to light. And he wasn't about to let the HOA dictate his life. As Eleanor and her fellow HOA members escalated their actions, Mr. Davis knew he couldn't take this fight alone. The legal documents were piling up, each more complex than the last. The pressure was mounting, and the reality of what he was up against began to sink in. Not just a battle for his property, but a fight for his way of life. The stakes were higher than ever. The importance of documentation and strategy, outmaneuvering the HOA. It's often said that knowledge is power. And while that may be true, the real power in Mr. Davis's case wasn't just about knowing his rights. It was about having the evidence to back up every claim, every assertion, and every move he made. The HOA may have had the upper hand in terms of resources and influence, but Mr. Davis had something more powerful on his side: the truth. Armed with zoning documents, property maps, and detailed records of every illegal action the HOA had taken. He began preparing for what would be the most important step in his fight, taking the HOA to court. One of the first major moves Mr. Davis made was to send a certified letter to the HOA. This wasn't just a friendly reminder to stop harassing him. No, this was a carefully crafted document that laid out the facts. It included maps that clearly showed his property was outside the HOA's jurisdiction, proving that they had no legal right to dictate what he could and couldn't do. He included his property deed, clearly indicating that his land was zoned agricultural, a category that made it exempt from the aesthetic guidelines that governed the neighborhood. While Mr. Davis sent the letter with the hope that it would stop the harassment, he also took another crucial step. He documented everything, from photographing his garden beds and the trespassing landscapers to setting up security cameras around his property. Mr. Davis knew that every act of intimidation had to be recorded. His property was under siege, and the only way to protect it was by having the evidence to prove his case. The power of media, turning the tide in public opinion. As Mr. Davis continued to document the HOA's harassment, the situation took a fascinating turn. What started as a legal dispute soon began to attract attention. Word spread that the HOA was overstepping its bounds, and not just within Maple Creek Estates. The local community, once indifferent to the HOA's internal affairs, started to take notice. When neighbors began reaching out to Mr. Davis, offering support and even sharing their own stories of HOA bullying, he knew that the fight wasn't just his anymore. It was a community issue. But it wasn't just the neighbors who were taking an interest. Local media outlets, especially those with a track record of investigating HOA abuses, began to look into the story. When a reporter from a local newspaper got wind of the situation, the story broke wide open. Journalists, eager to cover a tale of ordinary citizens standing up to a powerful organization, came to Mr. Davis's farm to interview him, see the damage, and investigate the claims. In a world increasingly dominated by sensational headlines and corporate narratives, this story was something different. It wasn't about scandal or celebrity. It was about ordinary people fighting back against institutionalized oppression. The media coverage did more than just inform the public. It gave Mr. Davis the platform he needed to rally support. Neighbors who had once been quiet, reluctant to get involved for fear of retribution, now began to speak out. They knew the HOA wasn't just targeting Mr. Davis. It was a system that could turn on anyone at any time. The more people who spoke out, the more powerful the movement became. It was a battle not just for Mr. Davis's land, but for the very soul of the community. Escalating threats and the unseen tactics of the HOA. As the story gained traction in the media, the HOA did not back down. In fact, they upped the ante. The notices kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. Fines skyrocketed, and the HOA began using every tool at their disposal to break Mr. Davis's spirit. They even sent people onto his property to damage his crops, cut his irrigation lines, and steal his produce. This wasn't just petty harassment. This was a deliberate attempt to destroy Mr. Davis's livelihood. For anyone unfamiliar with farm life, the importance of irrigation, crops, and timely harvests can't be overstated. A single disruption could result in thousands of dollars worth of damage, and that's exactly what the HOA aimed to do. But this tactic would backfire. While it initially caused significant harm to his farm, it also provided Mr. Davis with more evidence of the HOA's criminal activities. For many people, the idea of trespassing, theft, and vandalism may seem like isolated incidents. However, in the context of Mr. Davis's story, these acts were part of a larger strategy. Break the farmer's spirit by any means necessary. What the HOA failed to realize was that they were doing the opposite. They were turning Mr. Davis into a symbol of resistance. Every act of aggression made his case stronger, and the media attention only amplified it. Taking action, the turning point. It was at this point that Mr. Davis knew he had no choice but to take legal action. With his lawyer, Sarah, by his side, he filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA for trespassing, theft, and vandalism. But this wasn't just a fight for compensation. This was a fight for justice, for the integrity of the community, and for the truth. Mr. Davis wanted the court to see what the HOA was really doing behind closed doors. With evidence in hand, videos of the HOA members trespassing on his land, documents proving his property's agricultural zoning, and testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed the harassment, Mr. Davis was ready for the courtroom battle. But he wasn't just preparing for a legal showdown. He was preparing to reveal the ugly truth about how power, corruption, and greed could turn an ordinary neighborhood into a battleground. A legal victory on the horizon. As the court date approached, Mr. Davis knew that the fight would not be easy. The HOA had deep pockets and powerful connections, and they would stop at nothing to preserve their power. But the one thing the HOA didn't have was the truth on their side. In the next section, we'll dive into the courtroom drama, where the legal battle reaches its peak. Mr. Davis's story will serve as a powerful reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, standing firm and fighting for what's right can lead to victories that are more than just legal. They can be personal and community-wide as well. The courtroom, the final battleground. As the courtroom doors swung open, a sense of anticipation hung thick in the air. This was no ordinary trial. For Mr. Davis, this wasn't just about defending his property, nor was it solely about securing compensation for the destruction the HOA had caused to his farm. No, this was a battle for justice, an opportunity to show that even a powerful organization like the HOA couldn't simply trample on the rights of an individual without consequence. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. This was a fight to protect the very idea of fairness in the face of power. Eleanor Whitfield, along with her loyal followers from the HOA, sat confidently across the aisle. They had come prepared, their lawyer by their side, ready to argue that their actions were justified. They believed they could bully their way through this, using legal jargon and their influence to win the day. But what they didn't count on was the tireless determination of one man, armed with irrefutable evidence and a steadfast belief in his right to live freely on his land. As Mr. Davis took his seat, he felt a surge of confidence. This fight wasn't just his, this was the community's fight. It was a fight for everyone who had ever felt powerless against an organization that believed it could dictate every aspect of their lives. But most importantly, it was a fight for the truth. And the truth, as Mr. Davis knew all too well, could not be ignored forever. The power of evidence, exposing the HOA's lies. Mr. Davis's attorney, Sarah, was calm but resolute as she prepared to present their case. She had been the steady force guiding Mr. Davis through this entire ordeal. And now, in front of a packed courtroom, it was time to lay bare the ugly truth of what the HOA had done. The evidence was damning. Sarah began by showing the court the zoning maps, proving that Mr. Davis's land was agricultural and outside the HOA's jurisdiction. The HOA had no right to interfere with his farming activities. But the evidence didn't stop there. Sarah also presented the surveillance footage that had captured Eleanor and other HOA members trespassing on Mr. Davis's property. The footage was clear. Eleanor and her crew had stolen Mr. Davis's produce, cut his irrigation lines, and even vandalized his property, all while laughing and mocking the very man they were trying to push out of the community. As the footage played on the large screen, the courtroom fell silent.